After nearly 8 months of siege, there's a growing pressure from the international community and the American public for Israel and Hamas to agree to a ceasefire. The $64,000 question is whether the mounting pressure will force a change in posture 3/4 of a year into the conflict. Biden's speech last Friday seemed to indicate a shift in posture that was corroborated in a Time magazine interview he did yesterday, in which he said that there is every reason for people to draw the conclusion that Benjamin Netanyahu was prolonging the war in Gaza in order to maintain his grip on power. In his Friday speech, Biden also seemed to push back against Netanyahu's goal of, quote, total victory against Hamas, saying, quote, indefinite war in pursuit of an unidentified notion of total victory will only bog down Israel and Gaza, draining the economic, military, and human resources and furthering Israel's isolation in the world. Now, the NSA's Jake Sullivan told reporters on his trip to Israel this week that mediators are still waiting for Hamas's response on Biden's hostage deal proposal. An Israeli journalist reported that, according to Sullivan, Biden acknowledged that Hamas may choose, they think it's better just to let the war and the suffering and the violence continue. Now, whether Hamas or Israel are responsible for the lack of a ceasefire is hotly debated, especially after Netanyahu responded to Biden's speech last Friday by saying that it was, quote, a non-starter. The White House press corps seemed to express some skepticism as well on Israel's commitment to a ceasefire. Let's listen to what my co-host had to say yesterday.
President's remarks, which included the idea that as long as Hamas lives up to its commitment, there could be, and I quote, the cessation of hostilities permanently. And you say that is an Israeli proposal. So the government of the State of Israel is signed up to a proposal that there could be a permanent end to hostilities and Hamas still in existence in a meaningful way.
No, they are signed up to an agreement that leads to a permanent cessation of hostilities, but with a number of provisions that have to be negotiated to get there at the end of the phase.
But if the provisions...
But I say, I'm not going to negotiate all those provisions in public. I talked about this a good deal yesterday, about the fact that one of the principles the secretary outlined in Tokyo in November is that there cannot be continued rule of Hamas in Gaza after October 7th. I'm sorry, after the end of this conflict, and that's what we're committed to.
No, but I understand that, but if the provisions required would be the dissolution of Hamas, why would Hamas sign up to get that ball rolling?
That is such an important question. Unpack for us why you think it was important to get at the nut of that there.
Well, basically because the key question here is there a permanent ceasefire ever on offer to not just Hamas, but to the Palestinian people, broadly speaking? Because in any conflict, there's always going to be a question about the bona fides of ceasefire offers. Is this a genuine offer, or is it an attempt to get pressure off of Netanyahu, who obviously has become increasingly internationally isolated? Now, you alluded in your introduction, Brie, to the fact that Biden on Friday seemed to imply that if Hamas lived up to certain unspecified commitments, then there would be a permanent cessation. Netanyahu has never said that, to my knowledge, and that's why I asked that question. And to my mind, the State Department's answer was, no, actually, that isn't on offer unless Hamas dissolves itself. And, why would Hamas do that?
Yeah, I mean, there's this weirdness around what it means to have a ceasefire. If Netanyahu is saying he wants total victory, the elimination of Hamas, right, well, then that's not a ceasefire. That's eliminating the person who's, that's winning the war ostensibly, or however you want to frame it.
Or getting a surrender, which is different from a ceasefire.
Sure,
right.
Sure. But either way, it's not a ceasefire.
Right.
So when you have Netanyahu saying, I want total victory, when you have him framing this as an effort to destroy Hamas, it makes it seem very confusing, to say the least, that you have Biden coming forward and saying, oh, this is Israel's proposal for a ceasefire. This is Israel wants there to be the cessation of hostilities, and it requires Hamas to get on board. I mean, and I think that's the root of why you're getting all of it wasn't just you, it was a whole slew of questions that are trying to get to the bottom of what America's status here is, especially vis-a-vis Israel, which seems to be offering real pushback. Mm-hmm. I mean, frankly, sort of embarrassing pushback to the United States, who really seem to try to wrap the idea of a ceasefire in the veneer of Israeli acceptability.
Right, right. And the American government's perspective is Hamas is the roadblock to a ceasefire. That isn't actually anywhere near as clear, in my view, as President Biden is trying to make it appear, because we don't, of course, only have Benjamin Netanyahu. We have people to his right within his coalition who are, by any reasonable measure, fanatics, honestly. I mean, religiously inspired, hard-right people, including, in one case, Itamar Ben-Gvir, a person who has convictions in Israel for inciting racism and supporting terrorism. So, are those guys on board? I mean, Ben-Gvir actually has said he'll resign from the government if this deal goes through. But if you're looking at this from the perspective of, is there a deal really on offer here? It's just not clear that the answer is yes.
So how do you then make sense of the coverage of this, which if you open up your average mainstream newspaper is very much making the case that we're just like waiting on Hamas to say yes. I mean, you just alluded to the fact, or just pointed to the fact that two right-wing members of Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition have said they'll walk out and destroy his coalition power if this kind of a deal goes through. Basically, if we believe that a lot of Benjamin Netanyahu's posture here has been because he needs to maintain his grip on power, that basically is an indication that he's between a rock and a hard place, and he is absolutely not going to agree to any kind of a deal that's going to get him thrown out of power and then also make him vulnerable to the criminal liability that he's facing back home.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great point. And I think that one of the issues that I have, even as sort of an analyst about the Biden administration's position on all this, is there are so many ways in which it seems both morally and politically just incoherent, or you know, like if you believe Benjamin Netanyahu, that it is reasonable to assume Benjamin Netanyahu is prolonging the war for his own political benefit, then it is him who is the barrier or a barrier to a ceasefire being achieved. But when it comes to presenting the ceasefire, the President Biden and the people close to him just ignore that and say, no, it's not that at all. The onus is on Hamas. And, you know, this gets back to the whole central issue, which is why this is ages ago, there was an attempt by Netanyahu to say there should be a 6-week ceasefire, we want all the hostages back, and after that we reserve the right to go back to bombing Gaza, in essence. Has that changed?
It doesn't feel like it has.
Right.
It doesn't feel like it has. You just touched on this a second ago. There's this interesting thing where there's a debate that says Joe Biden doesn't really have power to do anything. Israel is its own independent country. He can't, you know, why is the left or why are anti-war advocates so angry? It's not like he can snap his fingers and have X, Y, and Z happen. But you do see how he can exert pressure in these little kind of micro moments. But I think what you described is him coming up to the edge with a Friday speech of saying, I don't support this total victory approach. We got to wrap this up now, kids. I got an election to win. But then also trying to make it play nice with Netanyahu, who's the very person that you need to put pressure on to get this to stick the landing, to say, oh, but Netanyahu really wants this too.
Sure.
And then when Netanyahu comes out and thumbs his nose at you in this aggressive way, saying, absolutely not, this is a non-starter, to not then double down and say, no, Netanyahu is a part of the problem. America is going to withhold aid. He has to, and military support and diplomatic cover. He absolutely has to do this. I don't care. I'm the president of the United States of America, not Benjamin Netanyahu's babysitter. I don't care if he's out of office, and there's literally nothing he can do about it. He needs to be begging me, frankly, to continue to support him and frankly be willing to follow the Americans' instructions on not invading Rafah, on providing humanitarian support, letting trucks into Gaza, if he wants any kind of continued support from America, and if he has any hope of maintaining political power in the United States of America. But that's not what Biden's doing. Why do you think that he is continuing to pretend, frankly, like Netanyahu was on board full-throatedly with this ceasefire plan? Because
as far as I can make out, the idea is that if you can create what I think is a fiction that the Netanyahu and the Israeli government are sort of well-intentioned, it retrospectively makes it easier for Biden to justify the amount of support he has given to that government.
So you think he's trying to retcon, basically? I mean, he's trying to create cover for when this is all over, and he still has to deal with the incredible, death and the total destruction that's been happening over the past 8 months.
Yeah, well, I mean, the basic Biden view is the Israelis are the good guys. Mm-hmm. Now, every time that is questioned by empirical evidence, he pushes back against it. ICC says we want arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant as well as Hamas leaders. Biden says that's outrageous. ICJ says you should stop military offensive in Rafah. Biden says, well, it's not really a major military offensive. They could keep doing this. One point that you raised that I think is really important, because it goes to what we're discussing about this incoherence. You mentioned rightly the fact that when Biden is pressed to do more to rein in Israel, the argument is, well, they're a sovereign state, they can do what they like. Well, whenever the argument was being made that the United States should give them $17 billion in weaponry, the argument was they can't basically be expected to defend themselves. Right. The United States has to supply that defense to them. So that doesn't give the United States any say or leverage? I mean, that seems
suddenly they're a small bean when it comes to needing military support. I mean, this is very difficult, I think, largely because the confusion here is not actually, I think, well, some of it is because there's doublespeak coming from Biden. There's this wanting to have it both ways. But part of it is that the media class is not doing a very good job of doing anything other than kind of parroting what Biden says about what the posture of the various parties are here, and taking it at face value with very little interrogation of whether or not Israel is genuinely coming to the table. And it is worth noting that this ceasefire deal that's on the table is substantially similar to many ceasefire deals of weeks and months ago that have been characterized in the past as Hamas ceasefire deals, and were Hamas ceasefire deals that Israel, of course, consistently throughout has not wanted to adopt. And it is, frankly, it's mind-boggling, it's confusing, it's disorienting to have to watch the media take the approach that it has been taking. But it is also, I think, heartening in some way to see that I think the protest movements that have been ongoing have finally created enough tension that I think the narrative that Biden adopted some months ago, that this was all going to be over by election time, that the kids were going to get off from school and this was all going to go away and this wasn't going to be a problem, has gone out the window. And it does feel to me like the Memorial Day Rafah tent bombing was a turning point of sorts. And I do wonder I look forward to seeing how Biden's going to continue to negotiate this kind of, I think, frankly, tantrum that's being thrown by Netanyahu, and an outright rejection of Joe Biden's kind of moderated posture right now. And he's actually going to fight back. If he's actually going to flip on a switch and say, if you're going to imperil my electoral chances like this way, if it's going to be me or you, then fine, Netanyahu, you finally have to go down, and I'm finally going to draw an actual red line. Yeah,
very little sign from doing that so far, but we'll see if that changes as the American election draws near.
Yeah. All right, stick around. We've got a lot more Rising coming up next.